Right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Samsara and Nirvana. I'm not sure which one you're in. Hopefully we'll lean a little bit more towards Nirvana when we're done tonight than we are Samsara. But I'd like to welcome back Venerable Legtsok and for our final concluding class on Samsara and Nirvana. Venerable, thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Welcome back, everyone. So yeah, like Michael said, this is our last class of 6. So but we are going through the Wheel of Life and the 12 links of dependent arising last week. So we have, anyway, we'll continue going through that this week, and then I'll speak a little bit about the path to the type of life. I think the next basic outline in the Lamrim is like the type of life. Well, how you get free from samsara, basically. So we remember at the beginning of the class we were talking about, well, the first session, what is the definition of samsara? So basically, and remember, samsara is the continuum of rebirths, or the continuity taking rebirths again and again in the 6 realms through the force of afflictive emotions and karma. So basically, samsara is that continuity of us, oneself as a person, taking rebirth in a suffering condition. And here, suffering condition means one in which one's under the power of afflictive emotions or delusions or disturbing emotions and karma that one's created in the past. So as long as we're taking rebirth through the force of our own, sort of uncontrollably, it's like we're a leaf that's fallen from a tree and is being blown by the wind here and there, without our having autonomous control about where we want to go, what kind of existence we want to be in, especially as we transition from one life to the next. We don't have control where we're going to take rebirth. And then even within this life, we don't really have so much control about what happens to us. Fortunately, we have some control, but not as much as we'd like. So samsara is that state. And then within samsara, then we looked at all the different kinds of sufferings, rated as the 3 types of suffering: suffering of change, pervasive compounding sufferings, then the 6 types of sufferings, the 8 kinds of sufferings. So that's all within the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And then we looked at the second noble truth of the cause of suffering, which is basically karma, and then more fundamental than karma are disturbing emotions in our own minds. And we spent one whole session on looking at attachment and how to work with attachment and its antidotes, and then one session on anger and its antidotes. And then we're spending these 2 sessions on the 12 links of dependent arising in the Wheel of Life. So let's spend a moment, generate a positive motivation for this session. So first, just take a moment, try to focus your attention, let go of any disturbing thoughts or any kind of distracting thoughts. Or remember whatever the other things in your life that you have to deal with, remember, pay attention to. You can try to leave aside for the next couple hours during the session. Try to focus one's attention as much as one can just on the here and now. And within that, it's good to practice placement meditation, focusing one's attention on an object of placement meditation, like one's breath or the continuity of one's consciousness or another or visualized object. So let's practice placement meditation for a minute. And then, if you like, visualize yourself surrounded by all the other sentient beings, beginning with one's parents of this life, then one's siblings or other family members seated on your right and left. Remember how you're interconnected with them. And then, yeah, and then also those whom you're most prone to become angry with, have to practice, or towards whom you have to make special effort to practice patience. Then all the other sentient beings of the human realm, animal realm, hungry ghost, hell, God, and demigod realms. Imagine them all seated around themselves in human form. And remember your interconnectedness with all these countless other sentient beings, and how you and others are all the same and wishing to have well-being and happiness and be free from suffering and misery. And then try to generate a particular motivation for the session, thinking, something along the lines of, or relating what we're studying to one's own aspirations for whatever that might be, or up to full enlightenment. So especially remembering how, our situation of being in samsara, being trapped in samsara now, and seeing that we can generate, renunciation, the wish to be free from samsara and achieve the happiness, and bliss of liberation and nirvana. And then seeing the situation of others we care about, that they're also trapped in samsara, then we can generate compassion for them, wishing to free them from suffering. And then for that purpose, then engaging in this session. And then if you like, you can visualize a field of refuge, like the Buddha, Dharma Sangha, space in front of you. So yeah, try this. And then generate the mind of refuge. And then we can recite refuge and bodhicitta prayer, maybe twice in Tibetan and then once in English. Sangye chodan soge chodan la jajo badu dani kyabzu chi dagi jenzo ge be sonan ki dola panjir sangye rupa sho sangye chodan soge chodan la jajo badu dani kyabzu chi dagi jenzo ge be sonan ki dola panjir sangye rupa sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the two collections from listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. So here in this module, our kind of, in a way, our whole aim is to understand this phrase, transmigratory beings, in the refuge prayer. It sounds quite awkward in English, transmigratory beings. In Tibetan, there's a translation of Drola Pencha Sangye. Let's see. Oh yeah, Drola. Here, this phrase. Dro means to go in Tibetan, but a drola. Yeah, here a drowa is one who's going, but here in this context, it means one who's transmigrating, one who's going through samsara, moving through samsara. So it's translated as transmigratory beings because it's like birds migrating. They go back and forth all the time from between continents or between breeding grounds and feeding grounds and stuff. So, and they're kind of continually going back and forth like impulsively. So, yeah, so beings in samsara were like impulsively, you know, taking rebirth again and again, going through rebirths. Right, so we're moving from migrating from life to life, which means that our continuum as a person and the continuum of our consciousness primarily. I mean, as we move from life to life, the basis for imputing us as a person is not our physical body, because it's not our physical body that goes from life to life, but rather it's primarily the continuity of our consciousness, our stream of consciousness, and then the imprints of karma and other things, and our subtle kind of energy that moves with that. On that we impute a person, I, the person. So we're transmigratory beings, means us as a person, the continuity of that person moves from life to life, which means taking rebirth in different bodies, different types of bodies, each life. And the force which drives that is, karma on the one hand, but karma is really like seeds of energy that have the potential to cause different experiences to arise in in the sphere of our awareness. Then karma, is like seeds of energy, which we've created in the past through our own actions. But then those seeds, so the karmic seeds, you can say, or imprints, then they have that potential to cause a whole experience. It can be a whole lifetime, or just a smaller experience, like a thought, or um, some fortunate, or pleasant or unpleasant kind of just small event within our life. But for the seeds, just like for actual seeds to ripen, they need to be um, well, they need the conditions of moisture and warmth and soil and so forth. They need certain conditions to affect the seeds, to cause them to start growing. So like that, the seeds of karma in our mind stream. On the one hand, I mean, why do we engage in karmic actions? Through the force of fundamentally ignorance, grasping at an inherently existent self, and then other afflictive emotions that grow from that, like attachment, anger, and jealousy, pride, and so forth. So it's through the force of those afflictive emotions that we engage in contaminated actions and create karma and create these karmic seeds. But for those karmic seeds to ripen themselves, also they need to be moistened by, again, afflictive emotions, specifically craving and grasping, as we'll see in the 12 links to dependent arising. But that's more like craving and grasping, those two links, refers more to karmic seeds that have the potential to throw an entire rebirth. But even just within one rebirth, so like within this life as a human that we've taken, for karma to ripen, it requires kind of afflictive emotions. And then meeting with objects, meeting with the right conditions. I'm just trying to think if that's really the case in every case for karma to ripen this life, if it requires afflictive emotions to be present in the mind. Actually, I don't think so. Just because once we've taken rebirth, then we have well, there's the types of karmas, the very powerful karmas that have the power to throw a rebirth, and then those weaker karmas that don't have the power to throw a whole rebirth, but within one rebirth. So like now we've taken rebirth as a human, then they determine like kind of different events that happen to us within that rebirth, and it's not 100% determined, because we still have free will to choose do this or that. But depending upon the choices we make, we might go different places, or keep company with different people, or take different jobs, or decide to engage in different activities, sports and hobbies and stuff. Then different karmas ripen in dependence upon the choices we make. But then those smaller karmas that ripen, maybe I don't think actually it doesn't always have to be the case. There's an afflictive emotion present in the mind. Sometimes just when you meet the right set of conditions, that itself causes, I mean, leaving out afflictive emotions, just encounter a certain person, just that itself can cause the karma to ripen, or go to a certain place, or eat a certain food, then that condition itself can be enough, I think, to cause the karma to ripen. Um, but in short, yeah, the whole being a transmigratory being basically means being a samsaric being. Being a samsaric being means that we take rebirth and experience all different kinds of things again and again in an unbroken stream through the force of karma and afflictive emotions. So the whole point of understanding that whole process. So if we skip back to, well, just think back to the definition. Maybe I'll pull up the slide. I'll show these slides now. Oops. Okay, I didn't. So there we go. Actually, I don't want to do that. Just zip over here. So here it is. Yeah. Remember the way we define samsara. Samsara is the continuum of repeatedly taking rebirths in contaminated aggregates, the power of afflictive emotions and karma. Yeah, so the part I left out, in contaminated aggregates. So remember, that means the body, our body and mind, a body and mind which are under the power of afflictive emotions and karma, so that we involuntarily experience like sickness, old age, and then death. So remember, in general, like this is what samsara is. And then we looked at more detail. Let's see, so I think I just escaped. Yeah. More detail, and yeah, like I said before, I won't pull up the slides, but the different kinds of sufferings that. So the reason looking at those first is to generate a sense for the dissatisfactory nature of samsara. That as long as we're in this kind of state of being under the control of afflictive emotions, then we inevitably experience suffering. And one reason, maybe, yeah, oftentimes people find that unpleasant to do, is because habitually we do the opposite, right? When we're in samsara, we try to look for all the pleasant things, all the nice things, which is a good strategy to keep ourselves kind of happy from day to day. Think about the nice people we know, think about the good fortune we have, the good things that happen to us. And there's definitely room for that. I mean, and it's definitely important to do that in many cases. But there's a danger that if we're kind of trapped, it's like we're trapped in this prison of samsara by forces in our own mind. That if we, within that condition, if it's possible to be free from that condition and have a much better, much happier, much more fulfilling state of being, but instead of recognizing that, we just look for all the the nice little pleasurable things within the prison of samsara and are content with those, then there's a danger that we never make the effort to get out. We never recognize the possibility of getting out of the prison, and we never make the effort to get out of it. So that's where the analogy of a prison of samsara is very useful, right? Because it is very much like, as if we really were in a prison. And you imagine in the prison there's like carpeting and maybe wall-to-wall carpeting and a nice mattress and good food and television and good library, but still, like, you're in prison. Like you're bound to within these 10 acres and this one building and one compound, and there's a perimeter with like a high fence and barbed wire and guards with guns, and they won't let you out. So you can't go to places you go, you can't meet the people you want to meet, you don't really have freedom to do the things that you have the potential to do, and enjoy all the things in the world that you have the potential. So that's what a prison is, right? So here the idea is that the analogy of a prison of samsara, the idea is that actually there's a kind of infinite possibility of beautiful, pleasant, profoundly meaningful kind of way of existing that's outside, completely outside of anything we've experienced until now. But that's a big leap of faith to do that, because like an ordinary prison, well, I think in all cases, there's nobody's just born in prison and then has to stay there, right? So In all cases, everybody that's in an ordinary prison, they've experienced the outside world first. They've spent time with family and been different places and had freedom to decide, what they're going to do each day. They've had some degree of freedom, and then they're put in prison. But here, when we talk about the prison of samsara, that's why it's so difficult to get out of samsara, because it's not like we had an enjoyable life outside of samsara first, and then we gave rise to anger and attachment and ignorance, and then all of a sudden we found we're locked in this cycle of birth and death through the force of those. It's like we've never known anything else. So um, so it's really difficult uh, to generate a kind of unshakable belief that it's possible to exist in a different way, that it's possible to transcend death. I mean, most people, you tell them that, they'll say, well, I mean, either it's just based on kind of blind religious beliefs. It has nothing, it's not validated by science or any kind of actual logical thought. So that's as people interested in Buddhism. I mean, there's different strategies. People interested in Buddhism, some like secular, kind of secular Buddhists, they would say, they try to, like Stephen Batchelor is foremost among, but they try to discount the Buddha's whole teachings on rebirth, and say that, yeah, actually that's something not that the Buddha didn't actually taught, or if he taught, he just wasn't taking it really seriously. But that's to really do a disservice to Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings, because it completely waters down, the profundity of the Buddhist message, and the profundity of, especially the Buddhist message about what our potential is as a person. So I think the better way to approach that challenge of, is it possible actually to transcend this process of birth and death, through the force of afflictive emotions, and experience something, a state of existence, kind of that transcends that. That's outside of that. That's free from that, right? Nirvana. A better way to approach was, first of all, if our hang-up was with rebirth, is to look at all the evidence actually, for and against rebirth, the arguments for and against rebirth, and try to objectively consider that. Yeah, unfortunately, in this module, we haven't really had time to do that. But one good place to start is all this research by Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, other psychologists, on children who remember previous lives. That's very compelling evidence, because people doing research on that, mostly they're just objective scientists looking at this anomalous phenomena of children who seem to remember very clearly the names of people and places, and very clearly details of events that happened before they were born. And not only that, they strongly identify, in many cases, with a person who died before they were born. And then they show, birthmarks and phobias, and kind of very clear behavioral characteristics that resemble the person they identify with. So that's one of the strongest types of evidence that actually rebirth is a real thing. It actually does exist. But then there's also near-death experiences, some other kind of things. But to get access to that sort of research, you won't find. Like one time, I was so excited, reading all kinds of different research about that, and I told my father about that. We were on a holiday together in Italy, and I was like, man, the evidence is so compelling, no? Although you don't see it in the mainstream kind of publications. But he was like, no. If that was for real, then you would see about it in newspapers and stuff. It'd be in the headlines of newspapers that so and so child is, remember this previous life. Sometimes it does appear in news sites, but not often. I mean, the point was to access the kind of research. You have to make effort, because it's not in mainstream, scientific publications, largely because of bias. Because most scientists will think, if you take seriously that possibility of rebirth, then it's a pseudoscientific kind of thing. Okay, well, that's all a bit of a tangent. So today we need to go through, let's start here, back at the 12 links. We need to go through the 12 links of dependent arising. So remember, here in the middle is the middle of the wheel of life is the 3 animals representing the 3 root afflictions. And then outside, the black and white halves of the circle, next circle, representing negative karma and positive karma. And then the 6 realms of rebirth, and then the 12 links of dependent arising around the outside. So last week we went through each link kind of one by one, and then tried to imagine how one would take rebirth. So this week I want to try to clarify and expand on that process of how these links interact with each other. Because if you probably remember from last week, it's quite complicated. It's kind of difficult to get your head around. So that's why I wanted to speak about it over 2 sessions. So this week we'll look at, there's 2 different ways of grouping these 12 links of dependent arising to show sort of how they interact with each other. And then I wanted to speak more about the third of the root afflictive emotion, ignorance. And then a bit more about karma. So maybe I'll say a bit more about ignorance first. That was the plan, but there's a danger as to spend way too much time on it, because it's so here's the 12 links we went over last week. So remember the link of ignorance. So this is the root of samsara, ignorance. This is what I want to look at in a bit more detail now. Ignorance, and then compositional actions. So it means essentially karma, but here specifically the kind of karma that has the power to throw a rebirth. So it's called throwing karma. And then, pull up my pointer here. Okay. Then, consciousness. Consciousness here. So I think last time when we looked at those, I was referencing primarily the remember the images that represent each of them. But yeah, so ignorance again is represented by a blind man. Compositional actions by a potter making pots, because they're like containers of energy. And then consciousness by a monkey swinging from tree to tree. But here consciousness, there's 2 actually. There's two types here. All right, I have to change the color of my pointer because I have a red pointer on a red background, which is just annoying. And
So slideshow instead of slideshow.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I think my slideshow option changed because I have this this one open. Oops. This cover. Okay, now set up and laser color, and I'll make it blue. Okay. See if that works. Oops, I don't know how to do this. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll figure it out later. So yeah, so when we talk about consciousness here, there's both the consciousness at the time of when the karma is planted. So remember, if we engage in an action through the force of an afflictive emotion, then we create karma. So then the karmic seed is planted on the mind stream. So there's the time that karma is, at that time we actually engage in that karmic action, it plants an imprint on the mind stream. So there's a consciousness, the stream of consciousness at that time. And then that stream of consciousness continues through life. So it's like, well, yeah, there's 2 different views according to different schools in Buddhism. Some say that it's the seeds of karma are carried on the stream of consciousness. So it's like a conveyor belt that goes from life to life that's carrying something on it. Others, actually, the highest school says it's not the seeds of karma they're not carried like in the stream of consciousness, but rather they're in the continuum of the person. So they're carried like in the continuum of the person. They're not expressly on like the stream of consciousness. It's just part of the continuity of the person. So that's the highest view of the Prasangika, middle way consequentialist school. But the consciousness, so there's consciousness at the time that the karmic seeds are planted, and then consciousness at the time that they ripen, right? So the stream of consciousness carries the seeds of karma through life, from life to life, right? And then in one life, then those seeds of karma, a particular seed, it meets the right conditions for it to ripen and bear a fruit or produce a result. So the consciousness at that time, that later time, is the second instance here. Anyway, we'll come back to that. And then there's name and form. So this is at the moment of conception, when we receive a body as our form, and then the name is our different aspects of our consciousness. And then as we develop in the womb, we generate, as a human being, we develop the 6 sense spheres, or an animal or whatever. So, and these are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and then our mind. So, and the more they develop, they enable us to experience things, right? Experience different objects. So then, and generate contact with objects in the world, right? So that's the next one, is when we make contact with objects of experience. And then that gives rise to, so then we go up here to feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Then especially those feelings give rise to craving and grasping, which are forms of desire. So we desire to be conjoined with, or to be conjoined with things we enjoy, or not separated from things we enjoy. Or we can also desire to be separated and free from things that we're averse to. So craving and grasping. And then, but craving and grasping here in the 12 links, they are particularly serve as like a kind of catalyst to cause compositional action, the seeds of karma, compositional actions, the seeds of those to ripen. So karmas that we've created before, so especially as we die, as we're dying, and it's time for karma to ripen, to produce our next life, to grow us into a next rebirth. Then it's these two factors, craving and grasping. And as we near the time of death, we give rise to craving and grasping to, not be separated from the pleasant things of this life, not be separated from our body or from our identity. Or we can crave, even just as something as simple as like craving warmth, or craving food, or craving to be with a certain person, or in a certain place. Then those cravings, they act as like the moisture and the soil and the warmth, causing a seed of karma to ripen. So then when that seed of karma is like, it's kind of like, when it's like the conditions for it to initially produce a result have all come together, and it's just about to produce a result. It's called potential existence. That's this. And then when that karma produces an actual like rebirth, so here it means for a human rebirth, it would be at the time of conception. It wouldn't be at the time of being delivered from the womb, which we generally consider birth, but rather it's the time of conception. And remember, this rebirth and the link of name and form, these two happen at the same time. So then the karma is ripened, then we produce rebirth, and then aging and death. And so then from the moment of conception as a human, or the moment of taking birth in a certain form, from the next moment we begin aging, and then aging inevitably ends in death, dying away from that life of that rebirth. So then you might ask, well, this link number 11, how can it happen at the same time as link number 4? Remember, that's what I was saying. There's not a chronicle. It's not a strictly. I mean, there's a chronological order to these, but all 12 links are not. Let's see. Yeah, this is what we're going to try to work out today. basically. How the different links interact and what's the logic for presenting in this way. But I mentioned in last week, basically there is a kind of chronological order, but all 12 links cannot be completed in one lifetime, clearly, because they describe the process of taking rebirth from one life to a next. So the minimum number of lifetimes in which all 12 links would be completed is 2. So let's just imagine how that would work first. So let's imagine, like, just looking in this life. In this life, okay, we have ignorance, and then on dependence upon ignorance, we have, attachment and anger. So let's say through the force of attachment, we fall in love with someone, and we feel like, we never want to be separated from that person. We give them gifts or whatever, and we maybe get married and have a great relationship. So through all that, we create karma, through those actions. And then that karma, the seeds of that karma are planted on our consciousness, on our stream of consciousness, right? But then, okay, so then name and form. So how do we get from consciousness to name and form? So imagine, so the seeds of karma are planted on the consciousness. Then for those seeds of karma to ripen and produce the name and form that's part of that set of 12 links, then we need craving and grasping. So then, and we need to die from that life, right? So in this life, imagine we have ignorance, we create karma, it's planted on the consciousness. So then for that karma to ripen, then requires, to die from this life and then take a rebirth. So then imagine, let's see. Okay, so then as we're dying, then we experience feelings that give rise to craving and grasping. So maybe as we're dying, we experience feelings of being, being sad, being separated from this person we fell in love with in this life, right? So because we all, in the basis of all the pleasant kind of interaction we had with them, relationship we had with them, then and we realize we're dying, we're going to be separated, never to meet again. Then we experience this feeling of longing to be with them. Then that gives rise to craving and grasping to not be separated with them or to meet with them again in the future, right? So, but the feelings there that we give rise to, they're the results. That feeling is a result of contact with the person, which is a result of having developed the 6 sense spheres from a previous karma, right? So the feelings that we experience in this life, they're the results of having taken rebirth in this life. So the feelings that give rise to craving and grasping as we're dying from this life are part of a previous link, a previous set of the 12 links, right? Because feeling always is connected with contact and 6 sense spheres and name and form. But the name and form, the sort of the rebirth we have now is a result of a previous karma. So now we're looking at within this life. So then you can start to see how there's different sets of 12 links that they interact with each other, and that's how karma, is perpetuated, right? Is by these different sets. So now we've already taken rebirth in this life through the force of a previous instance of ignorance, a previous instance of compositional actions, a previous instance of consciousness, and we have this name and form. We've already fully developed our sense spheres. We've come into contact with objects, and on the basis of that, we generated feelings. So now we're trying to imagine, but within this life, okay, so again, we had ignorance, we created karma, then we, and that karma is planted on the continuum of consciousness. As we're dying away from this life now, we give rise to craving and grasping. So remember I said that's a big boundary there between these two. That's where a big boundary where 2 different sets of 12 links, they interact. So as we're dying away from this life, we give rise to feelings, which are a result of a previous set of the 12 links. And then, so we give rise to craving and grasping, that ripens the karmic seed we create. And then when it's fully ripened, it's just about to produce a result. That's the potential existence. So that's like the moment just before we die, basically. Um, and then we take rebirth. So as soon as we take death, well, there could be a bardo period, which we don't really have time to go into this module, but there can be. Basically, it's just kind of an in-between period where your karma throwing you into a future life has already begun to produce results. It's already pushing you towards that future life. But like if you're going to take rebirth as a human again, for instance, then if you have at the moment you die, there's no suitable parents. There's no parents with whom you have a karmic connection. And even if there are those parents, they have to be in the state of sexual union, like in the in the situation of sexual union for your, and their sperm and egg cells coming together for your continuity of consciousness and person actually to conjoin with those sperm and egg cells of your future life. So the bardo period is like you're waiting for a set of conditions which is suitable for your karma to produce your rebirth to come together, right? So that's why there is that bardo period. But so craving, grasping, then the karma, the seeds of karma is fully kind of ripened, and then there might be a bardo period, but then you're thrown into this rebirth. So remember, that's what I was saying. So the rebirth of this set, it happens at the same time as the name and form of that set. So remember, in this life, then we have ignorance, we produce karma, it's on the stream of consciousness, and then as we're dying, we have feelings which are part of a previous set, but that gives rise to craving, grasping. So these three all go together always. So that gives rise to you can think like these three kind of go together, and these three go together, and then the other 6. Yeah, exactly. That'd be right. 6. They go together. Anyway, there's different ways of grouping them, but so the craving, grasping, then the seed of karma it's fully ripened, and then in the very next moment it produces rebirth, and that at the same time as that rebirth occurs, then name and form. Because remember, that's the moment of conception. So that's the moment when we initially get our body and our mind, different aspects of our mind of that life, and then as those develop, we generate the 6 sense spheres, we generate contact, and then we generate feelings. Right. Anyway, that's one way of looking at the order. So we'll come back to that. But for now, I want to discuss, because so how do we stop this whole process of taking rebirth and samsara again and again? The main one is here, to eliminate the very root of samsara, ignorance. So that's why I want to that's why there's a whole module in Discovering Buddhism on emptiness. Because that's all about the wisdom that counteracts. The wisdom of emptiness is what eliminates ignorance. So, I mean, largely you'll learn about that in that module, but especially, I just to kind of get a bit of an introduction, I wanted to spend some time on it here. Actually, I wanted to spend more time than we have now, but at least I'll hopefully familiarize you with basically what it is. So this ignorance, which is the root of samsara. So definition, there's different kinds of ignorance. One kind of ignorance is just simply not knowing something. Like I don't know the names of your parents, for example. That's one kind of ignorance. You don't know the names of my parents, probably. So that's just simply not knowing something. And that's not, I mean, also but there's more, I mean, in relation to the Buddhist practice, there's like not knowing if future, past and future lives exist, not knowing if enlightenment is actually possible. Those are all, relatively harmless. And by learning, then we gradually eliminate those kinds of not knowing. Remember the example I gave before is if you lost your wallet or your keys, just not knowing where they are. I mean, that kind of ignorance can be quite annoying, actually. If you need to get into your house or your car, then it can be difficult. But this kind of ignorance is not just not knowing, rather it's an awareness which wrongly engages its object, right? So remember the example before is like, not only if you lost your wallet or lost some money, but then you think that, someone else, maybe in your house or a neighbor or someone, they took it, that they stole it, but actually they didn't, right? You just think that. So that would be an example of wrongly engaging an object, thinking that someone's a thief when actually they're not. So that's, and that can lead you, to do things or say things which actually could be quite destructive. So, so that's the kind of ignorance that we're talking about here, where not simply you don't know something, but you think something is the case when it's not. Mm. So within that, there can be two kinds, actually, superimposition and deprecation. So superimposition is where, just what I just said, where you grasp at something, grasping at what does not exist to exist, or what is not X to be X, right? So the example, like when someone's not a thief, you grasp at them as being a thief, or something that does not exist, you grasp at it as existing, like, um, well, like an all-powerful God who dictates everything that happens and controls, like a puppeteer who controls everything that happens. That thing, that the kind of thing doesn't exist, but to grasp at it as existing is a kind of superimposition. We're superimposing something on reality which is actually not there. And then the other kind of ignorance is deprecation. So these are just general. So that's where actually something does exist, but we hold it to not exist, or something is not X, but we hold it. I mean, something is X, but we hold them not to be X. So like, yeah, like holding that karma, the law of cause and effect, does not exist. Actually, it does exist, but then we hold that it doesn't. Or holding that, for example, a Buddha isn't completely free of suffering. Actually, they are, but we hold that they're not. Yeah, that would be one. So then there are different divisions of ignorance. Yeah, according to different objects we grasp at, and according to how it arises. Maybe more important is, well, okay, objects, so like grasping at the ignorance of cause and effect, not being aware of how karma, law of cause and effects works, or ignorance of suchness, which is what we're focusing on here. And then two different ways kind of ignorance can arise. So there can be intellectually acquired ignorance, which is where we're exposed to, wrong explanations, and then we believe those. So it's kind of intellectually acquired. Or innately arising ignorance. So the ignorance which is the root of samsara is innately arising. So it's not that we heard some wrong explanation from someone, or came up with this mistaken theory on our own, but rather it's just a spontaneously, innately arising kind of mistaken apprehension of ourselves and of others. So now this fundamental ignorance, just a few things about it. So let's see. So fundamental ignorance is ignorance grasping at objects to exist from their own side, inherently or by their own nature. Yeah, maybe let me just read through the notes, the outlines here a bit, and then I'll try to make it more palpable, more tangible. Okay, yeah, so it's quite straightforward. In reality, things exist in dependence upon causes, parts, and mental imputation. This ignorance grasps at things as existing independently. So being not dependently arising, but existing independently in and of their own self, not being dependent arisings. This is called grasping at a self. Yeah. So here, remember that the self has a very specific meaning here. It's not just what we ordinarily think of, like me, myself, and I, but rather it's this kind of independently existing. So it's more like akin to soul, independently, autonomously existing kind of thing. It doesn't even have to be a person. It can be a person. So there's grasping at a self of persons and grasping at a self of phenomena. Both grasp at their object a person or the aggregates like our body or a mind as existing from their own side. And they're both roots of samsara. Okay, so the main thing here, though, is up here. Ignorance, grasping, and so the ignorance we're talking about is innately arising ignorance. Grasping at objects to exist from their own side or inherently or by their own nature or by their own power or independently. So this is, yeah, the main point we need to get. So, and this is kind of, in a way, it's one of the most essential points of the Buddha's entire teaching, is that, because, so remember, I mean, the historical Buddha, remember, he's this prince born to this king, his father in northern India, and then, had this very privileged life as a young person, but then gradually realized that, no matter how much pleasure and enjoyment we have, inevitably we all experience sickness, totally incapacitating, like sickness. And then old age, we all grow old, and the capacity for our bodies to sustain us, support us, gradually deteriorates. And then that ends in death, right? And we die away from this life, right? We're separated from all the people, all the things we enjoy. And then once we die, then through the force of karma, we take rebirth. And that process, rebirth, was just a given in the Buddha's day and age and his kind of, in the society, culture he lived in. That was assumed. It wasn't it's considered a controversial thing. So then we take rebirth, and then in rebirth, and the process of taking birth itself, and then the process of, as a very infant, a young person growing up, is full of different challenges, and then again gradually experience sickness, old age, and death. So then the Buddha left home with the big question: is there any possible way to be free from this, to eliminate this? So then he studied with different teachers and found the kind of spiritual practices they taught didn't lead him to a state of complete freedom from the round of birth and death, from samsara. So then he set off on his own, and then investigating what is like the fundamental cause by which that causes me to take rebirth, then experience old age, sickness, and inevitably death. And is it possible to eliminate that? So that fundamental cause he identified is this ignorance, which is the root of samsara, right? So the way he investigated was, look at, karma causes me to experience things. Where does the karma come from? The karma comes from, my having strong desire for things that I perceive as attractive, and aversion to things that I perceive as unpleasant, unattractive. So then he looked at, where does that kind of desire, those two different kinds of desire, for things we like and aversion to things we dislike, where does that come from? And he found it comes from the sense of self. There's an I at the center of that, at the root of that is this sort of sense of a self, and then by virtue of that, sense of other. And then perceiving other as some as attractive, we desire others, other objects as unattractive, then we have repulsion towards. But that the root of that is this sort of strong sense of self. So then he investigated, well, that self, the way I perceive that sense of self, is it accurate or inaccurate? Is it true, or is it a kind of false way of perceiving what I am? So then he investigated, well, okay, I have this thing I identify as self, then actually what is that? This self, this I that I am, what is it? And then, when he investigated, he found, well, there's my body, and then all the different parts of the body down to the level of cells and molecules, atoms. But none of those, no part of my body, and the body as a whole is not the I, it's not myself. And then what else is there? There's all my conscious experiences, my memories, my thoughts, my opinions, my knowledge, all the information, the things I know, my experiences of seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking about things. But when I search within that whole collection of conscious experience and every kind of, a mind, every instance of mental experience that I have. There's all different parts and all different moments in time, but none of those themselves are the I, or the person that I feel like I am. So then, how does this, but then we can't deny that there is a person. There's this person here doing this investigation, this person who wants to know, this person who's meditating and investigating, asking the question, what am I? So then, so then the question is, well, then how does that person exist? If the not my body and none of the parts of my body are the I, the person, and then my mind and none of the instances of mind, the moments in time or the different varieties of my conscious experience, if none of those are, I can't find one of those that I can say is me, is the person, and yet I exist. Well, do I exist as something other than those, as something separate from my body and mind? Something that's like, like my body and mind are like kind of puppets, and I'm the controller of those, like the puppeteer. But then if that were the case, then we should be able to like put our body and mind aside, and without reference to those, find this soul, this person, the self, who exists somehow independently, or apart from, not something as fundamentally different from the collection of body and mind. But yet, if we put our body and mind aside and look for that other something else that is I, there's nothing there. There's nothing we can point to outside of our body and mind, which we can point to and say, oh, that's me, that's the self. So then also he eliminated that possibility. Um, so then you come back to, well, then how does the self exist if it's not within the collection of the body and mind? And it's not outside, it's not something separate, then how does it exist? The way it exists then is as something, is the self exists as through the power of mental imputation. Upon the collection of body and mind, we have a sense of, we have an idea of self, of I. And through the power of that, then we do exist as a person. But there's nothing more fundamental than that. So this ignorance, which is the root of samsara, it doesn't see, it doesn't realize that. It doesn't, so it's the ignorance of not seeing that the way we exist is as something merely imputed by our concepts of on and body and mind. So on the basis of our body and mind, we think I, and thereby through the force of that, the I exists and there is a self. So the ignorance, it's a superimposition. Remember, it exaggerates the sense of I. So it has the idea of that. Rather, it's the sense that when I have when I think of myself, or when I perceive myself, that self that exists is something that exists from its own side or by its own power. It's not from the side of my thinking or having an idea of I, but rather there's a real substantial thing there. And it feels like if we were to search for it, then we would find something that is there, right? That exists there. So here's where the meaning of these different terms. So I'll flip back to the slide now. This is the wrong one. I think this is the one I want. So these different terms. So ignorance, grasping at a self to exist from their own side, right? So in the context of what I just explained, then when we have a sense of like, I like this, I want that, I'm doing this happened to me. Whenever we have the referent to the self, there's a sense of that self exists by its own power, independent of, without depending upon our body, without depending upon our mind, or without depending upon any other parts, and especially without depending upon our idea of a self. So it seems like, without depending upon any of those things, from its own side, it just exists, naturally by its own power. And that's the same meaning, inherent. It has, it's like a self-contained power or mode of existence in and of itself. So it has, that's what it means to have kind of an inherent existence. It just naturally is there by its own power, or yeah, by its own nature, um, or independently. These are all kind of, they're all synonyms, which means they all mean a similar thing. They all have slightly different shade of meaning, but they mean something more or less similar. And they're all characterizing the kind of ignorance, which is the root of samsara. So always, it always helps when we're trying to identify this fundamental ignorance, which the Buddha said is the cause of all of our suffering experiences, is to counteract that with interdependence arising. So how do things actually exist? Everything exists as interdependently arising phenomena. So, thinking about ourselves as a person, how do we exist? Just like I was describing earlier, as like a body. We have the physical body and our mind. Then our physical body, we have countless different parts, and we can see even any of those parts, like just think about one cell. It's not static and unchanging for the slightest moment, and it doesn't exist by its own power. It exists through the force of continually receiving nutrients from outside, passing through the cell wall, and expelling waste. And the cell itself is made up of many parts, right? It has the cell wall and a mitochondria and all the ribosomes and all the other parts I forgot from science class like years ago. So so everything in the physical world, it's easy to see. It's all made up of infinite parts. And then if you go down, this is where quantum mechanics, this is why His Holiness mentions quantum mechanics in almost every other talk he gives these days, because you go down to the very most fundamental level of physical things, and you have protons, electrons, neutrons, and then Higgs bosons and quarks and stuff. But at that very like, it's not even microscopic, it's submicroscopic level, then actually, I mean, this is the fundamental thing about quantum mechanics, is the fundamental finding is that actually the most discrete units of matter or energy, they don't have, they're not uh, localized, and they don't have a discrete, they don't have discrete locality, and they don't have discrete other properties, basically velocity either. Rather, quantum what is it? Particles exist in a state of a superposition, right? The best way to describe them is as a probability field spread out over a space. So that means that basically it's that saying that the most fundamental building blocks of the physical world are fundamentally interconnected with other things. They don't have an independent existence, independent of other particles, like billiard balls on a table, but rather they're intimately interconnected with other fields. Basically, they exist as like a field. So our physical body doesn't have, there's no. When you look within it, you can't find a self. You can't point to anything that's a self. And then also our mental events, our mental world, we can see is completely, complex and changing moment by moment. There's nothing within it we can point to a self. And then apart from those, of course, you can't look outside your body and mind and find you'd be able to be like find yourself hanging in the corner of the ceiling somewhere or something. But that's also ridiculous. Completely apart from your body and mind, you find something yourself. So then that leads to the conclusion that that there is no self when you search for it that's findable in this kind of as an inherently existent phenomenon, something existing by its own power from its own side. But yet we can see hopefully we'll do this meditation, I think, later this session. But when we have instances of strong attachment, strong aversion, or being defensive, feeling falsely accused, there is this innately strong sense of like our real I, and it does appear to exist from its own side. Okay, so let's pause there. Maybe if there's any immediate questions, I can try to answer. Otherwise, we'll take a break. Any questions right off the bat? Okay, then let's take a 5-minute break. So, are there any questions about anything I went over in the first half? Oh yeah, go to.
So, like mind being beginningless, is ignorance beginningless?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And grasping?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you'd have to say all the afflictive emotions are specific instances of them, like not, but in general, yeah, they're all beginningless. Yeah, there's no, and there's no, if you ask, well, why, or something, there's no answer really. No. Um, yeah, why don't let's spend maybe 10 minutes, we'll do a bit of meditation. Um, on this kind of ignorance and how it gives rise to the other afflictive emotions. So first we'll just try to identify this kind of sense of grasping at an inherently existent self. And then try to look at a bit how it's related to attachment, aversion, or anger, and karma. So first just sit quietly in your chair. Try to focus your mind on your breath or another object of placement meditation. And then just try to ask yourself some self-referential questions. So try to keep your mind in a very kind of objective, in the perspective of an objective like observer. And then ask yourself some questions like, who am I? Or what's my name? Maybe just keep it simple now. What's my name? Where am I? What am I doing? And then as you ask those questions, just try to see what kind of innate sense of response arises. Of course, you ask yourself the question like, what is my name? Then you'll remember your name. But together with that, there's a sense of self, right? You ask yourself, where am I? You name the place that you're in, city or country or whatever. But there's also, together with that, there's a sense of the self who's in that place. So try to pay attention to, that without thinking about all the things we talked about before or anything in Buddhism. Just look at it the natural sense of self that arises in response to these kind of self-referential questions. So first, just spend a couple and ask yourself those questions, some questions like that. So now, think about a time maybe that you were criticized or falsely accused of doing something, or rightly accused, and you felt defensive. And then check to see how the self, the sense of self, is there. Can you identify the same type of sense of self as when you just asked these kind of questions, but stronger? Does it become stronger when you feel like defensive or you're criticized or accused of doing something? Mm. And then does that sense of self, the way it appears, does it have these characteristics I described earlier, where it seems to exist by its own power or from its own side without depending upon different parts of the body and mind, and without depending especially upon my own concept of self? So rather, does it seem that without depending upon anything, it exists by the force of its own power? And then the last step here. So look at an instance of like a mild anger, and then an instance of attachment that arose, for yourself in the past. And when you see that when a mind of anger arises, does this sense of self become stronger or not? And the same with attachment. And I mean, and a secondary question, does it play a role in giving rise to anger, or strong attachment? But first, just look at, does it become heightened? Does it become enhanced or increased? The sense of self when I become irritated or angry. And then how does it play a role in giving rise to anger, irritation, or strong attachment, craving for something? Okay. So let's relax our attention there. So that's, yeah, that, I mean, from there, then we could, well, there's different ways to go, but usually when we first identify the strong sense of self, I mean, it's important, it's extremely important to see how it, uh, yeah, how it's related to the other afflictive emotions arising, right? Especially like selfish concern. We look at self-centered, egotistic concern. Yeah, on the one way, we can look at how, start with, as we did here, this just gently identifying the sense of self, just in when we ordinarily just think of ourselves in different ways, and then seeing how that gets kind of intensified, the more deluded our mind becomes. Basically, the stronger the afflictive emotion we have in our mind, the stronger the sense of grasping at a self is. So you have to check in your own experience to try to see if that's the case or not. But we can also kind of begin with just looking at the different uh, afflicted states of mind, afflictive emotions, and seeing how we grasp at a self there. And then typically what you then do is analyze to see how that self doesn't actually exist, just by searching for it within the body and mind, seeing it's not anywhere in the body, it's not any part of the mind. It can't exist separate from those. Therefore, it doesn't exist in the way it appears. But that kind of analysis you'll do in the module on emptiness, if you participate in that module. But could you all, I mean, could you get a sense of that? I mean, yeah, the sort of a sense of self that seems to exist by its own power from its own side. Did that seem clear? Or, yeah, even a little bit fuzzy, but clear? Okay, good. Yeah, yeah, I don't think it's that hard now to do. I mean, the easier way to do is to think when you're being falsely accused or being criticized and you feel defensive, then there's a very strong sense of the self arise. So in the Lam Rim, like is usually recommended to first begin, but that remembering that kind of situation and then look at how the self seems to exist. Does it seem to be, an interdependent thing, depending on what parts or causing conditions or mental imputation? But in other more kind of a little bit more subtle ways, the way I explained, just think about, ask yourself questions about yourself and see how that sense of person arises. Okay, then let's go back to the 12 links then. We'll skip over. Well, yeah, and so within the 12 links, remember the first link is a link of ignorance. And so it's this kind of fundamental ignorance, grasping at a sense of person or self existing by its own power, from its own side. And then that gives rise to karma. And between there, so between, let's see, these two links, between the first two links of karma, yeah, ignorance, and then compositional actions, there are other afflictive emotions, right? Anger, attachment, selfishness, arrogant, pride, afflicted doubt, and so forth. So all the other afflictive emotions that lead us into doing things, they all arise from that ignorance. But then here in the context of the 12 links, the karma, I mean, there's like a whole module on karma, I believe, in Discovering Buddhism. So there's many different things to look at. But here in the context of the 12 links, we're primarily concerned with these two kinds of karmas: throwing karma and completing karma. So throwing karma are karmas that have the power to throw a rebirth. So that's the main thing. They have the power to throw a rebirth due to having been created with all four factors. So there's different factors involved in creating a karmic action. There is the basis, yeah, the intention, then the preparation, and the completion. So Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We don't have time to go into all those, but basically it means like, as a person, uh, creating a karma and there's appropriate object for like, mm, well, like the karma of killing is just very easy one to look at. It's a typical example. So like there has to be, you as a person are alive, and then there's another living person. If you try to kill someone, but actually it's just a mannequin or something, that's not a suitable basis to create a complete karma of killing. So there has to be the basis, and then the intention. You have to have the intention to kill, to create a complete karma of killing, for instance. And remember, there's both virtuous and non-virtuous karma. You could also have the karma of saving someone's life. Like, to create a karma of saving someone's life, though, if you see what you think is a person floating down a river, and then you jump in the river to save them, but then actually it's just like, again, it's like a mannequin or a, a piece of driftwood, then you don't create the complete karma of saving someone's life, right? Because there was nobody dying. So, um, but like that. So to create the complete karma of killing, you have to have the intention. Sorry, that's more related to the basis, that example. But to create complete karma of killing, you have to have the intention to kill. So if you just get in a car accident and accidentally someone dies as a result, there's no intention to kill. So it would be a complete karma of killing. There has to be intention. And then there has to be preparation. You actually have to do something. So just having the thought to kill someone or save someone's life, that's an initial preparation. But because it's a physical act with your body, then you actually have to do something. And then someone actually, in the case of killing, the completion is the other person dies before you, right? So yeah. So anyway, with any karma to be powerful enough to throw an entire rebirth, it has to be complete in these four parts. It has to have the complete basis, intention, a preparation, and then there has to be completion of the action, whether it's a action of one's body, one's speech, or one's mind, right? So then a throwing karma is, again, one that has the power to throw a rebirth. So as we die from one life, it has the power to throw us into another life. And then the completing karma are the weaker karmas. So a karma that does not have the power to throw a rebirth, but rather determines various conditions that a person experiences within a rebirth, right? So us maybe, like, I don't know, having the particular features, like we have a human body due to the throwing karma, to be born into a human rebirth. But then we have, particular features of our body, like long hair or short hair or bald or, have a lot of hair or, be very thin or tall or short, or be born to the particular parents is kind of a factor, but like the particular country we're in or the different kind of experiences we have to meet the different people we meet, have the particular proclivity, like to be interested in the outdoors and not in video games or something. All those kind of particular, to prefer sweet food over salty food. Those are all related to completing karmas, right? So completing karmas are karmas that determine all these smaller things that happen, smaller facets of our existence in one rebirth. And they don't have to be, to create those, they don't have to be complete in terms of the basis, intention, the preparation, and the completion, right? Just any one part of those is there, and then we can create a completing karma. So they're weaker karmas. Okay, so that's the first two, ignorance and compositional activity. Actually, this is, so now look at the different, we just have like 15 minutes left, but the different ways of grouping the two links. Yeah, actually, I want to look at this way of grouping them by Nagarjuna first. There's a way of grouping them according to Nagarjuna, and then a way according to Vasubandhu. But this group, according to Nagarjuna, so Nagarjuna divides into three groups because it's a little more simple, right? So three types of the links of dependent arising. So there's ignorance. So the first is afflictions. So he groups according to those that are afflictive emotions, those that are karma, and those that are sufferings. So within the 12 links, the ones that are afflictions are ignorance, the first, and then craving and grasping, because these are forms of attachment, right? So those, and then those afflictions, they give rise to or ripen these karmas. So the first, these afflictive emotions, mainly ignorance, it gives rise to compositional actions, right? To karma. We create karma, we engage in karmic actions and thereby create karma. And then craving and grasping, these two, they ripen that karma, and it becomes existence, right? Yeah, so those 8, 9, they ripen, the karma becomes 10. So the karma is either created by afflictive emotions, or it's caused to ripen and produce its result by afflictive emotions. So sometimes afflictive emotions are described as like the water, the moisture that waters the seeds of karmic, seeds of karma. And then, so the results of these two, but why are these two grouped together? Because these are both the truth of the cause of suffering, or the origin of suffering, and these produce the result, these different suffering experiences. So, or different aspects of the suffering, which is the result. So there's two groups here, right? So the first group, when a karma ripens and we take rebirth, yeah, well, the consciousness is a little problematic here, because remember, there's the consciousness at the time of the karmic seed is planted, and then the stream of consciousness at the time the karma is just about to ripen. But in a way that the consciousness, though, here, our stream of consciousness as it exists now is a result of karma and afflictive emotions. Like the kind of human consciousness we have moving through this life is a result of afflictive emotions and karma. Although it's a little problematic, because fundamentally our consciousness is not fundamentally a product of afflictive emotions. It has its own kind of power, inertia, and it's fundamentally pure, right? And that's why it can be purified and go on to enlightenment. But the consciousness being talked about here is not just this fundamental, like most innate, clear light mind, but rather it's that contaminated consciousness, which is a basis for the karmic seeds, which moves from life to life. So it's like a more gross level of consciousness, you could say. And it's part of the truth of suffering, right? So then there's name and form, basically our body and mind. Then the 6 sense spheres, contact, feeling, and birth, aging, and death. So the point is, these are all results of the interaction of afflictive emotions and karma. So then the other way of looking at, and Nagarjuna, in these two verses he describes, he says the first, the 8th, and the 9th are afflictions. The 2nd and the 10th are karma. The remaining 7 are sufferings. And then he says, from the 3 arise the 2. Right? So this is from these 3 afflictive emotions arises karma. Right? And then from the 2 arise the 7. So from these 2 karma, we create karma, and then the karma ripens. Then that's what directly produces the sufferings. These 7 factors of suffering. And then again, from the 7 arise the 3. So then once we've taken rebirth, and we have, body, the 6, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind, and then we come into contact with objects, then we experience feelings, all within having birth and then aging and being on the way to death. So within that, again, we still have ignorance. Again, ignorance gives rise to, and craving and grasping, they give rise to karma. And then the karma ripens, right? So that's how we continue. So it says, again, from the 7 arise the 3, And then again, of course, from the 3 arise the 2, from the 2 arise the 7, again and again. Thereby the wheel of existence itself repeatedly turns. Then the other way of grouping them is according to Vasubandhu. I don't have a quote from him there, but it's this, he groups a little differently into what are called the projecting factors and the actualizing factors, and then the projected factors and the actualized factors. So again, it's basically a division into causes and effects. So just as before, like these are the causes, afflictions and karma are the causes, and the sufferings are the effects. Here you can see the projecting factors are all ignorance and craving and grasping are afflictions, as Nagarjuna and grasping. And then compositional factors, remember, is karma. And the conscious, here is different, right? He groups this as like a cause. Yeah, but existence is the ripening of karma. So that's the same. The only one that's different here is consciousness. So consciousness is this, remember, the basis for the seeds of karma to move from life to life. But they're called projecting factors because it's these, well, ignorance primarily, it's ignorance, and then the other afflictive emotions. It's by them that we create the karma to be projected into a future life, right? To be thrown into a future life. So there's ignorance, and then the karma, and then the basis of that, the karma. So these are factors that they're like the things that are going to, it's like the forces. So creating this karmic force that's going to throwing karma, it's going to throw us into a future life. Then the actualizing factors are the conditions which need to be present for that force of karma to throw us to ripen, right? And the beginning of that process of it ripening. So craving and grasping ripen the seeds of karma, and then existence is a state where it's just about to produce a result. And then the projected factors and the actualized factors. So this I'll have a little difficulty. I've never really gotten quite clear about it. But the projected factors is easy. It's the kind of the things, well, it's through the force of that karma, the things that are thrown into a rebirth. So what happens when that karma ripens is it produces a body, like the form, and then the particular type of consciousness unique to that sort of rebirth. So when we were born into this life as a human, we receive this human body, and then this sort of human kind of mentality, you can say, especially endowed with intelligence and the ability to reason and discriminate among things. So it's projected. So that karma like throws or projects this body and mind, and then the kind of sense spheres. Like, remember, I was making the comparison. Imagine if we were born as a bee, we would have completely different kind of eyes and ears and nose. I don't know if bees have noses, but you would experience the external world in a completely different way, like in accordance with your body, right? And then you would contact different kinds of objects. So that determines what kind of objects you contact, and that determines what kind of feelings that you experience. Yeah, I wonder how bees experience flowers. Like, must be very different. They relate to them as something a food source. We just see them as something that's kind of, nice decoration for the environment generally. Anyway, so those are the projected factors. And then why are these called actualized factors? This is the thing I'm most not clear on. I'm not sure why they should call it actualized factors, but I imagine it's something like because these things that are projected, the name are basically the body, and then the type of mind and the way that contacts objects and the way it experiences feelings, those all arise like within the kind of context of it's like within the broader context of taking birth and then aging and death. So the fundamental like birth and then aging and death are like, it's kind of like the forum, the theater in which these things all unfold. So it's similar to the way, these are the factors that fundamentally produce the karma that's to be thrown, and then these are just conditions that enable that karma to ripen. Then it's kind of like the actualized factors are kind of like the very setting which enable the projected factors to kind of manifest. That's kind of the way I read it. Then, yeah, just last two final things. One is in the Wheel of Life. I think I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I did. Actually, I read this earlier. Usually, where is the picture? Here, remember there's Buddha is here at the top, showing, and he has his hand outstretched, pointing over this way to the moon. The moon is like the purity of nirvana. It represents nirvana, the kind of pure state of being free from samsara. So usually like either here or just at the bottom of the image, there are these verses that are included. So this is words that the Buddha had included in this illustration. And he said, undertaking this and leaving that, enter into the teaching of the Buddha, like an elephant amidst, actually it's reed huts, not mud huts. I just checked the translation. Actually, like a reed huts, grass huts, like an elephant amongst grass huts, destroy the legions of the Lord of Death. So basically by, engaging in virtuous actions, positive actions, and leaving behind, abandoning non-virtuous actions, enter into the teachings of the Buddha, and then become a powerful practitioner. So like an elephant amongst reed huts, completely destroy, your afflictive emotions and karma, destroy the legions of the Lord of Death. Those things that cause Lord of Death, cause the experience of death again and again. Those who, with thorough conscientiousness, practice this taming doctrine will, having totally abandoned the wheel of birth, bring suffering to. Right. So that's the whole point of studying the samsara and the wheel of life, or the wheel of birth, as it's called here, is to understand how we're thrown into a rebirth again and again, and thereby experience suffering. And then by understanding how, we can reverse the process. And then so the type of life, so that the type of life through which we abandon samsara, we become free from samsara, is one in which we can train in the three higher trainings, right? Which is the higher training in pure morality, the higher training in meditative concentration, and the higher training in wisdom. So that's the last outline from the outlines I was made. Then the last thing is renunciation and the path to liberation. So yeah, one of the points of this module is to distinguish between renunciation and bodhicitta, I believe. So, or is it? No, it's not that. It's between liberation and enlightenment. Anyway, I'll distinguish both though. But renunciation is basically when you see the suffering of samsara and the whole way samsara works, and you realize it's possible to be free from that, and then you want to be free. You want to achieve a state that's free from that, being under the control of afflictive emotions and karma. So that wanting to be, the desire to achieve a state of freedom from samsara, of the suffering of samsara, is renunciation. Whereas bodhicitta, of course, is primarily focused on others, seeing the way that other beings suffer in samsara and wanting to free them from that. And then for that purpose, recognizing that the best thing one can do is achieve full enlightenment. So the wish to achieve full enlightenment in order to free others from samsara is bodhicitta. Whereas liberation from samsara is just the state of being free from this process of experiencing birth, old age, sickness, and then death again through the force of afflictive emotions and karma. That's freedom from that is liberation. Whereas full enlightenment is a state that, in addition to freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering, you fully develop all of your positive potential. You develop all positive qualities to their greatest extent. So wisdom, compassion, generosity, energy, enlightened energy, enthusiasm, patience. Then it's developed to their fullest extent, so you can be of greater benefit to others, to other sentient beings. So that's enlightenment. They're different. Enlightenment's much higher state, right, than just being liberated from samsara. So then, for a person in the Lamrim, for a person whose their aspiration is primarily to achieve freedom from samsara, then of course a bodhisattva as well, but primarily for that person, then is taught the 3 higher trainings. So the way to do that, because ultimately we have to eliminate the ignorance, which is the root of samsara, and what eliminates that is the wisdom, realizing selflessness or emptiness. But for that wisdom to be stable and powerful enough that it can completely uproot the tendency to grasp at a self in our minds, we have to have extremely stable concentration. We have to have perfect single point of concentration. But to develop that concentration, we have to have a mind that's very, at ease with how we are as a person, how we behave. It's very peaceful. So to have a very pacified, peaceful, subdued mind, we have to practice pure morality, not killing, not stealing, not doing anything we would be ashamed of or feel uncomfortable with ourselves about. So we practice pure morality as a basis for generating meditative concentration, and that's the basis for generating the wisdom, deeply realizing selflessness to such a degree, a powerful degree, that it can cut the root of samsara. And then here in the Lamrim, it's taught that the best life, kind of life, to practice these is actually within ordination, like living a life as a celibate person and keeping the kind of vows of a monk or nun, but then within being a lay person, just keeping the 5 lay precepts, where you take vows to abandon killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, and also intoxicants. So it's that kind of on the basis of taking vows and then living life according to those vows that one can most effectively engage in these 3 higher trainings and thereby free oneself from samsara and then work to know how to free others from samsara. Okay, so that's it for this module. There's any questions? Can answer, otherwise we dedicate. Okay, you look happy, so I feel like I've succeeded. Job accomplished. Yeah.
You've gotten us out of samsara.
Well, not yet, but maybe it's a start. No, definitely a step towards the right direction. Yeah. Anyway, I always have more in mind to say, but yeah, you see, there's a lot going on though, especially in the Wheel of Life. It's a brilliant illustration. It illustrates so many different things. So it definitely spends time to think about it, learn about it again and again, and practice meditating on it. Like I said, I think before, it's one of those things to meditate on it. It's a little tricky because there's so many different moving parts. So it just requires this is where you see it really pays off to study and then contemplate and then reflect. But the more you do it, it's very profound, and it really can change. I mean, thinking about this not just as like a Buddhist kind of lesson or interpretation, but the more one can really think about what's happening with oneself and all the people around oneself, then and what's going on, try to think just outside the scope of just this life, but where did they come from, why are we here, where are we going, what's possible. It's so connected with all those questions, and then it can really fundamentally change the way you look at life, and other people and your relationships with other people, and what's meaningful in life. So okay, so let's dedicate now. So rejoice in all of your own efforts and the efforts of all the other students who participated in this module. All the merit we've created by doing something, just to benefit ourselves, benefit others in a very wholesome way. And then rejoice in all the merit created by the center, the Noble Ling, and by all our own teachers, His Holiness Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and others, other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, other enlightened beings, from Shakyamuni Buddha up till now. And we can rejoice in all the merits created by other ordinary beings like ourselves, doing all kinds of virtuous things throughout the world. So by the force of this, may we ourselves and all other sentient beings be free from every form of suffering, especially from suffering of being bound in samsara, under the control of afflictive emotions and karma. So rather, may we for ourselves and for other sentient beings as well, generate an existence that arises fundamentally from wisdom and kindness, compassion, mental clarity, a kind of virtuous intention. And bring to mind any other prayers you yourself would like to make. So may those your prayers also be fulfilled in accordance with your wish. Okay, so thank you all for your participation. Thank you for to the center for inviting me and hosting the course. And I hope we meet again in the future sometime.
Thank you, Venerable, and thank you for taking the time to take these 2 extra weeks to teach us that, because 2 of them got canceled. We all appreciate that.